Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar today to discuss one of the IEA's latest publications, Scaling Up Demand Flexibility. And we've got quite a packed schedule today, so I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. We'll be starting off very shortly with some opening remarks from Mr. Alessandro Guerri, the Director General of the Italian Ministry of Environment and Energy Security. After that, we'll have a keynote address from the head of the Office of Energy Efficiency and Inclusive Transitions here at the IEA, Dr. Brian Motherway. And after that, then we'll get into the report, Scaling Up Demand Flexibility, and we'll do an overview of some of the key findings, as well as some of our policy priorities that people can take away and consider when they're looking at developing policies in their own countries. And after that, then, we've dedicated quite a good chunk of time today to have a real good discussion on implementation and some of the challenges or opportunities that exist by having some really interesting perspectives from the world of technology, of research, and also policy deployment. And after that, then, we will hopefully there'll be some time for a Q&A. So for the colleagues that have joined us today and have any questions, please feel free to send them to us using the Q&A function, and we can present those to the speakers at the end of the session if we have time. And to close us out, then we'll have updates on some of the TRIDEN pilot projects which are being carried out by our implementation partners over at United Nations Environment Programme. So with that, I think we'll kick things off, and we can open the floor to our colleagues in Rome. So please, the floor is yours.
So good morning to everyone. Thank you for the floor, and in general to all the participants for joining us today for the launch of this important report from IEA. That is an agency that is recognized for its capabilities, and in this case for leading an important analytical work, but also the United Nations Environmental Programme for its continued support within the TRIDEN initiative. And I'm also pleased to welcome the expert and panelists who will contribute to today's discussions. For the Italian Ministry of Environment and Energy Security, this report is part of a broader strategic effort within TRIDEN, launched with IEA and UNEP, aimed at testing concrete solutions on the ground, mobilizing technology providers, research centers, startups, and private companies in supporting countries in making their energy system smarter, more flexible, and more efficient. And I would say by keeping all these pieces of the overall picture together. The timing of the discussion is particularly relevant. Electricity demand is rising, driven by electrification, cooling needs, digital infrastructure, and artificial intelligence. At the same time, countries are increasing the share of renewable energies. While it is essential for decarbonization, it requires more flexible and resilient grids, as we all know. In this context, digitalization is becoming strategic for modern power systems. Digital technologies can increasingly become an active resource, helping to reduce peak loads, improve reliability, integrate renewables, optimize infrastructure, and lower system costs for private companies and also the communities in general. The report also sends another message to policymakers. Technology is necessary but not sufficient. Smart meters, connected devices, digital platforms, and data systems are key enablers, but the real challenge is to create a right policy, regulatory and market conditions so that flexibility can be valued, scaled up, and integrated into system planning. This is also a central lesson of TRIDEN. Through competitive calls, the initiative has already supported 18 pilot projects involving more than 80 entities, including private companies, research centers, and startups, with an overall value of more than $38 million. These projects show how digital technology can support cleaner, more efficient and reliable energy systems while mobilizing, co-financing and creating opportunities for innovation. Looking ahead, the challenge is for sure to scaling. Pilot projects are essential to test solutions and generate evidence, but we must also create the conditions for successful solutions to be replicated, financed, and integrated into broader investment pipeline. This is why the development of a Trident financing facility is particularly important, as it can help connect innovation with finance and support the transition from pilots to larger scale deployment. And on this, I would like to call both IEA and UNEP to help us. As you might know, Italy is quite committed at international level through multilateral instruments like yours. But now I think it could be a really relevant proof of our capabilities to move from pilot projects to financing capabilities. And so I would like to invite you to try to involve all the instruments that the international multilateral level can play a role within this context. I mentioned only some of them, like the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, and maybe Adaptation Fund is the main mandate. But or the one of the UNDP, UNOPS, we know many pieces of the international multilateral system has the potential of supporting us with financial instrument. The DFIs for sure, World Bank, and we could try to connect Mission Triangle, for instance, in Africa and Trident. So I'm pleased that this report was also presented in Montreal in the presence of our Minister Gilberto Pichetto Fratin during the IEA Global Conference on Energy Efficiency. That occasion confirmed the importance that Italy attaches to that digitalization, flexible grids, and demand-side solution as key components of a secure and cost-effective energy transition. Let me conclude by reaffirming Italy's commitment to the Trident initiative and to the partnership with the IEA and UNEP. I've also requested financial support for the future years, and I'm quite positive and confident that we will receive it. But again, for sure, the reasoning of continuing investing or investing more on Trident broadly depend also on the capabilities on going beyond the pilot project and financing proper scale project capable to be provide an actual support also to communities, to the target communities in developing countries. So I wish you a very productive discussion, and I thank you all for being here today with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General. There's clearly there's a lot of activities in Rome at the moment that's been reflected by the output and the words of your minister as well. So without further ado, I will pass the floor over now to Dr. Brian Motherway, the Head of Office of Energy Efficiency and Inclusive Transitions here at the IEA. Please, Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brendan, and thank you, Director General Guerri, dear Alessandro, and colleagues in Rome. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And again, let me start by thanking you very sincerely. We have such excellent collaboration with our Italian colleagues, with the Minister, with you, Alessandro, with all the colleagues, some of whom good friends I see with you there in the room. We're delighted to be continuing to work with you on the Trident initiative, and delighted to be here today launching our new report, Scaling Up Demand Flexibility from Peak Management to Efficient System Operation. As you said, Director General, just last week we gathered in Montreal for the IEA's 11th Annual Global Conference on Energy Efficiency. We were delighted that Minister Pichetto Fratin was one of our key senior guests there, who contributed in many sessions, including a session dedicated to this theme where we were able to launch this report formally, and it's a great pleasure then to be following up today to talk about it in more detail. The conference last week concluded with a strong outcome statement made by the ministers and governments, where the governments recommitted to energy efficiency as a cornerstone in energy efficiency, in energy policy more generally, reaffirmed the importance of the doubling goal agreed at COP28, and also recognized the importance of making better use of existing infrastructure to strengthen resilience, improve affordability, and reduce exposure to
Thank you very much, Brian. Let's keep things moving along, and let's then just have a quick recap of the agenda for colleagues that have just joined us. So we've just had some really important remarks from our colleagues in Rome, from Director General Alessandra Guerri, from the Italian Ministry of Environment and Energy Security, and we've just heard remarks from our Head of Energy Efficiency and Inclusive Transitions at the IEA here, Dr. Brian Motherway. Thank you very much, Brian, for those interesting remarks. So now I think we'll move straight on to the report. So this piece of work that we've just released and was launched at the 11th Energy Efficiency Conference at Montreal just over a week ago, on the 29th and 30th of June. This piece is the second in a series of pieces of analysis that we've done at the IEA, which have looked at demand-side flexibility. The first, the value flexibility, a more high-level piece of analysis, which was released early in the year, which was an introductory piece to really bring the concept of demand-side flexibility to the forefront. And this follow-up takes a much more quantitative approach by looking at energy system modeling in real world conditions, while looking at 3 different case studies to really explore, well, how much flexibility is there? There's a lot of sound out there from different parts of the energy system of how much flexibility potential there could be. So this is the first piece of real in-depth analysis that we've done here at the IEA, and one of the most important pieces of demand-side flexibility research globally that we think. So what we've taken those questions to inform the direction of this analysis and the report of why demand flexibility matters today by looking at the current energy situation, the landscape that is in front of us, what demand flexibility can deliver in real terms, and also then finally where to focus policy attention. Whilst we're presenting some examples of demand flexibility in action today, much more potential lies in the road ahead, is which we will develop. So our approach to this was to take 3 case studies by looking at energy systems in different stages of development, by looking at South Africa today to see where demand-side flexibility is already playing a real significant role, by looking at the power system there of looking at mobilizing large industrial users to manage peak demand. We then take an approach by looking a little bit into the future, by going to the world of 2030, where we look at Thailand. And with this, we can see that Thailand has got ambitions to start deploying large-scale renewables, but there's also, on the other side, on the demand side, there's increasing EVs, there's increasing load from air conditioners, which all will have a significant effect on future demand. And then we look even further ahead by looking to Ireland of 2035. Ireland already has quite a large amount of renewables in its share of its electricity mix, but it has ambitions to go even further. It's also a situation where policymakers there are looking to decarbonize large segments of society, such as transport, but also buildings, which the role of decarbonizing heating in particular will have a significant effect in coming years. And whilst these are 3 specific countries, the focus of this report is not to focus primarily on these countries, but for each country to look at these case studies and to recognize similarities in their own host country and think, well, there's a lot of learnings from this particular pieces of analysis that we can take forward. So when we look at in the coming years of the role of flexibility, between now and 2035, which is our furthest case study in this report, we can see that depending on the region and on those specific local requirements, the amount of flexibility that's going to be needed in power systems in order to balance those increasing shares of renewables, but also increasing loads from industry, from data centers, from EVs, from air conditioning units, from heat pumps, and other loads as they come online, that will increase the amount of flexibility that's needed in power systems. And looking at our modeling, which is on the stated policy scenario, that by 2035, the amount of flexibility, depending on the region, could increase between 2 and 7 times from where we are today. And historically, that flexibility has come from thermal power plants or hydropower plants, who will increase their outputs in order to manage that increasing demand. But as the amount of demand is continuing to increase and driving peak demand even higher, there then is the opportunity to look at how we can try and mitigate some of that demand growth by trying to reduce that demand by unlocking the flexibility. And within this report, we look at how the mechanisms of flexibility could be unlocked for peak shaving, which is most widely used today, and then increasingly load shifting, which is the focus of many of the pilot projects that are out there right now. And understanding how these components interact is going to be essential in assessing where the flexibility could be realized in practice. If that's implicit through indirect customers' responses to price signals, time of use tariffs. If it's expensive, you could encourage users to use electricity at a cheaper time of the day, or through explicit demand flexibility through agreed verified dispatch. And then seeing how this flexibility is going to fit in is an interaction between many different segments, how the end use, the digital infrastructure, how the markets are operating together, and how customers are going to operate within those structures is going to be quite important, because it's these four elements interacting which will ultimately drive the flexibility or act as barriers if not in suitable conditions. So looking at demand flexibility today, that we can say, historically, demand flexibility has been used as an emergency response, and this has been activated during periods of system stress or supply shocks. Many of the demand response programs that are still being deployed today have originated from the energy crises of the 1970s. And you can see the situation where we are today, where we're facing supply shocks in certain areas as well, in certain regions. This could potentially be driving the focus of demand flexibility more. So more recently, we can see that looking at some of these countries that we've analyzed, that up to 9% of the peak demand in some of these major economies has already been managed by peak shaving programs. But this is just the start of it. As you can see, there's still 90% of that peak, which is available for flexibility programs to begin looking to assess how they can fit into this. And as I mentioned, the ongoing energy crisis could potentially be driving countries to start looking to see how they could be supporting customers to manage these energy price spikes again in the coming years, particularly as those prices get expensive during peak demand periods. Because when we look at peak demand, this isn't activated a lot of the time of the year. And in fact, in many areas, this peak hours is only up to around 10 hours of the year. And this makes up for 0.1% of the total peak. But this has driven around 3.4% of the peak demand when we look at our case study from South Africa. So this is just a few short hours of the year, which is then helping to set the overall cost of operating that power system. So how to identify ways to help the system operators to limit growth in these exact moments will therefore have a real outsized potential in future. So then we see, well, where are we going next? What's the flexibility look like in the years ahead? In this report, we did a lot of analysis of the future growth potential of various technologies. When we look at the role of EVs, heat pumps, thermostats, smart meters, and how that is starting to change in different countries. And when we look at Ireland, for instance, we can see that there's a particular growth in EVs, and this has been then reflected in the growth in EV chargers. Between now and 2035, we could see nearly a 7-fold increase in the amount of EV chargers that's going to be out there, a 10-fold increase in the amount of smart EV chargers. Additionally, we can see the growth in batteries, in heat pumps, in smart thermostats, and smart meters. But what we're not seeing in the current technology deployment is how these devices are going to be controlled, how they're going to be smart. And this is where we need policymakers to start thinking about how do we look to access the benefits of digitalization for the system, but also for the customers. And this is going to become an increasing area of attention because simply having that new load come onto the power system does not make it flexible. Indeed, when we look at how electricity is used within power systems, it has a significant effect. When we look at the analysis of the flexibility potential in Ireland, for example, this centers on the combination of the technology uptake and the shiftability of end uses. In particular, what we're demonstrating here is that simply having a large demand growth does not mean that flexibility is going to come out of that. When we look at the heating demand of Ireland in 2035, we're seeing quite a significant growth in decarbonised heating, electrification, heat pumps, and other electrical technologies. And this is 2.5 times larger a load than the load that's going to become available for EVs. Yet, electric vehicles have got 3 times more flexibility than heat pumps. So this means that not all loads coming online are equal, and some will offer much more flexibility than others. And this will be very local, will be very specific to the conditions. This is based on the flexibility of a cool climate. In other countries which are hotter and you've got much more air conditioning load, the demand curve will also be different in that location. So what we also see is the role for increasing renewable absorption by increasing the efficiency of power systems, reducing the amount of wasted energy through curtailment. And this is where demand flexibility can step in, because it has the ability to absorb renewables which would otherwise be curtailed. And by absorbing these renewables, which have an economic cost, as the generators are often paid to curtail their energy, by absorbing this energy, we can then reduce the amount of the wholesale costs, and this will then have the ability to trickle down to customers. For the analysis, when we looked at Ireland of 2035, we could see that potentially demand flexibility could reduce the total cost of the wholesale energy by up to 10%. And this, looking at today's costs, this last year in 2025, this made up for around $9.3 billion of electricity paid. So a 10% cost of the total cost of energy for Ireland, we estimate in 2035, could be upwards of 500 million euros, which is a significant amount of cost savings. But not all of this is easy. You know, there's some challenges that are going to need to be considered of how we integrate the demand side flexibility into systems. And one of those ways that we can look to see how to manage flexibility is by maximizing the amount of flexibility in the first place, and by looking through more traditional forms of energy efficiency. In particularly, we see like the flexibility from increased building efficiency could also benefit power systems globally. In this situation, again, we're looking at Ireland's power system, and we estimate that by improving the building efficiency of through retrofitting or building codes of new buildings as they come online, this could potentially unlock up to 15% more efficiency by reducing wasted energy, by increasing the amount of renewable absorption into buildings. And this could be done through more ambitious building codes, looking at improving behind-the-meter storage, smart EV charging, and digital technology integration in a more holistic way. Another area which has got promise is about looking at the whole of system efficiency. So this is beyond reducing the peak demand. We look at how power systems could be used much more efficiently. And flexibility could be used to improve the utilization of existing network infrastructure. In several regions that we modeled of Thailand, in this instance, we could see that there was a potential to lower the load across many of the transmission lines to improve the overall operating efficiency. But one of the things which has become apparent then is that it is not all equal, and some areas of the transmission grid would actually increase their load. So what this signals to us is that much more closer coordination will be needed between DSO, TSO, and retail in order to improve network planning longer term. And other areas which we need to look at then is about the equity of all of this, particularly when we talk about new technologies and technological innovation, digitalization. This brings equity into focus. because like many other technologies that come online, a large share of the benefits would go to the participating households and those households that can afford those new technologies. When we look at South Africa in this instance, we could see that up to 50% of the demand from high-income households could potentially become flexible, compared with around 9% of lower-income households. So that's a five-fold difference between those two bands. And this means that households with greater access to electric vehicles, smart appliances, or home energy management systems, they will be best placed to capture the benefits of dynamic pricings. And conversely, those with less flexible demand, lower access to digital technologies, have the potential to be left behind when we look at deploying these policies. So this therefore means that there's a greater policy view which is going to be needed, and targeted support that could enable direct participation or benefits shared more broadly through the development of more equitable market approaches could be something that needs to be considered. And addressing these issues, it's not limited to power sector policies, and this could feed into wider discussions of country level policy priorities. So then we get down to the policy priorities of what we're looking at from this report. So we've come up with six policy priorities that countries could consider as they're starting to develop their own policies when we're looking at demand flexibility. And the first is to measure and value flexibility as a system resource, to recognize that flexibility could have a greater role of the system operation, incorporating into electricity planning, investment, operational decisions in the years ahead. And some of this then will be important is to build those digital and technology foundations early. And that is investing in the infrastructure, the interoperability considerations, to think, how do we avoid proprietary lock-in to certain technologies and suppliers, data access, and the skills needed then for organizations and individuals to operate within these new environments. And customers need to be placed at the center of the flexibility design. They are going to be a key consideration when we're looking at aggregating large amounts of residential and commercial customers to give benefits to the system, but they should also see how they can then participate and gain the confidence that they're going to be supported as they support the power system in a wider way. And as we're looking there, discussing how to make sure that the market design is inclusive, technology neutral, to make sure that it's more fair in the years ahead. And then to see how flexibility could be integrated in a wider power system transformation. This isn't just demand flexibility in isolation, but to see how this all fits together in a big whole system approach, which will then hopefully see power system design move towards a more flexible, efficient way of operating by scaling flexibility up from the many different pilot projects which are taking place right now, but into a more routine situation where we can see this is going to be reliable longer term. So now we've heard from the analysis, and this has just been a very brief overview, and I do encourage colleagues to go and look at the review, look at the report in detail, to have a good read through. There's over 600 individual data points within that project, and it'll give a lot more information, and I'm sure there'll be information there that people will find important for years to come. And this report, it demonstrates the growing importance of demand flexibility, the significant opportunities that it presents for modern electricity power systems. But the next question then is how we turn that evidence into action. These things are not going to happen on their own. The markets need to be suitable, policies need to be favorable, and technology needs to be up to speed and safe and reliable. So to help answer those questions on how do we scale up demand flexibility. We're joined by three experts who will bring really important diverse perspectives to this conversation, from the consumer participation, from digital infrastructure, and from policy implementation. And to handle all of that discussion, I now invite my colleague, Donata Schilling, policy analyst here, again in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Inclusive Transitions here at the IEA, to have that conversation going forward. So please, Donata, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brendan, and thank you for that very interesting presentation of the report. So I'd also like to take a moment to very warmly welcome our three experts who will help us to shed some light on this question. Thanks so much for being with us today. Amber Woodward, who is an international public affairs manager at the Center for Net Zero. Anil Rawal, who's the CEO and managing director of IntelliSmart. And Shane Prendergast, who's the program manager for EV charging infrastructure and policy, mobility, and smart networks at the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. So we've heard about this report that we're launching, or I suppose relaunching after the global conference today, which makes the case that demand flexibility is moving beyond this traditional role of managing periods of system stress. And as electricity demand grows through overall electrification, through higher cooling demands, digital infrastructure, and AI, flexibility is now becoming more of a strategic capability that can improve reliability, reduce costs for consumers and more system-wide, and make better use of existing infrastructure. We've heard evidence from South Africa, Thailand, and Ireland. And now I'd like to explore what this can mean in practice and for implementation with our panelists. So let's get started. And I'd like to start with you, Amber. Your recent research has found that many households with heat pumps are already now delivering flexibility to the system through quite simple automation, often without changing their level of comfort significantly or at all. Does this change the conversation, do you think, from asking consumers to change their behavior towards sort of equipping them with better technologies, tariffs, and digital services?
Yes, the simple answer is yes. Thank you for inviting me to join. I'm Amber from Centre for Net Zero, and we definitely agree with that proposition. I think for years, as Brendan pointed out as part of his presentation, demand flexibility has been framed as asking consumers to turn down their electricity consumption, to reduce peak demand, and in doing so, respond to ad hoc notifications or price signals, manually responding, and perhaps sacrificing a level of comfort as a result. But our research suggests that that's increasingly not the case. So you mentioned our heat pump analysis. Through that, we worked with Octopus Energy and identified 6,000 consumers who were adopting heat pumps in the UK. And with that, also adopting time of use tariffs. And there we found that consumers were able to use very simple automation. 3/4 of the consumers in our trial just used a smart thermostat to respond to that time of use tariff, automatically setting their heat pump to come on at times of cheap electricity in the day and lower the demand at times when it was more expensive. And as a result, were able to halve their evening peak in response to those signals. So that's a really simple way that technologies, tariffs, and very simple automation can help consumers respond flexibly. And I think it's that will allow demand flexibility to scale beyond those kind of simple, traditional kind of events-based flex peak demand management events to something that can be valuable at a system level. So increasingly, I think policymakers and governments and grid operators should be thinking about, do consumers have the right technologies? Are there tariffs that reward flexibility at the times when it's needed for the grid? And can consumers access those kinds of digital services, automation that allow them to participate in a really simple way? And I think if we get those things right, then flexibility can really scale.
Thank you so much. And then this also helps consumers see the benefits themselves, presumably, yes.
Yes, exactly. Like in this trial, as a result of responding to those price signals, consumers saved 18% on their energy bills, and that was equivalent to, at the time, around £300 a year. So really significant savings, and that's what really engages consumers.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to turn to Anil. I would like to ask you, so the report concludes that scaling demand flexibility really depends on digital foundations, such as smart metering, data access, and crucially also interoperability. From your experience in deploying smart infrastructure at scale, what do you think, which of these foundations should countries prioritize first, and why?
Sure. Hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you. So thank you for having me in this important discussion. On this topic, what I would like to start saying is that traditionally, in most of the countries, the electricity systems have been developed for meeting the requirement of scarcity of resources in terms of electricity generation. If you think historically, since early times in our childhood, we were being told consume less because there is less energy available, right? And you should do better consumer behavior to really save electricity. That has been the learning all across our lives. Demands would continue growing. So demands are continuously growing on account of global climate change impacts. As we see today, India has seen major impact this season in terms of peaking demands, residential demands, as well as demand coming from the new age businesses like data centers, artificial intelligence. The power demands are rising, so energy requirement would continuously be rising, and these geopolitical shocks which keep coming here and there, which impact all of us suddenly, are additional warning signs that we should be better, more ready, and don't prepare for scarcity of resources only, and be better prepared for handling the peaks. Right. As I was saying, traditionally the only solution the utilities had was whenever the demand is high, they would load shed. They would do load shedding. Most of the houses would be power cut, and without they knowing when they would be removed out of the system. And that's very undemocratic way of handling the energy demands. Times have changed. Availability of energy is not a problem. With renewables being available in abundance, what is mattering and what is important today, how do we handle this lots of energy which is coming from renewable resources, as well as consumers are really producing their own energies through solar rooftop. So there is a two-way major supply of renewables. One is the grid-based, grid scale, and second is the distributed energy, DERs, as we say. So both of these are very important to be absorbed in the system, so we can fight out the scarcity and stop doing the undemocratic load shedding as we have been doing for years. So that's the challenge, and that's where the demand flexibility is the critical resource which we have to use. Why I'm saying resource? Because it itself is a huge availability of resource where we can use it and handle this scarcity. Now, how do we handle it is obviously where the demand is highest, we have only two options. One, you invest into grids so much that you handle the peak demands. But then that's very inefficient way of handling the problem. Second way is that can you generate more during that time? That could be another solution. Third is that can you make such market dynamics, market design, that during that time the prices are dynamic and they can be managing the peaks. So these are a few ways of managing. Either you generate more or do the capex on the grids so that you can handle more, or third, you do the market designing. So I think putting too much of capex is not a right solution on building more and more on the grid. What is the right solution is having the right data to handle this demand at the peak time and generating more. So let's talk the first one first. How do you handle this demand in terms of market dynamics and market pricing? That requires data. That's where your question comes very, very valid. That how do you gather this data? Granular data is required. Earlier grids used to have snapshots of the data required, snapshots energy requirement at periodic times, say 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. But that's not enough now because of the dynamism and variability added by renewables. So you need the real-time data. Real-time data and data analysis for providing this information to the operators so that markets can be designed and the pricing dynamism can actually match the input generation as well as the demand dynamism. So that requires a granular data, and granular data can be received through smart metering. So that's where this smart metering becomes extremely critical for handling the demand flexibility and peak shaving. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, as I said, was generate more when peaks are. How do you do that? So you would have to innovate the generation side also. You cannot continuously innovating the market pricing. You'll have to innovate on the generation side also. Incidentally, India is coming out with a very unique market pricing mechanism, which is being called CFDI rather. This is called contract for differential. So what is the contract for differential is that at the peak price, what is the market exchange-based pricing being found out, and what the supplier or provider can promise the price, I'm saying. So one is market price, one is the promised price. So then what they do, they see the differential. So this is contract for differential. Let's say if I promise at the peak time I'll provide power at X price, and that time market pricing is Y, then X minus Y would be the price which I'll be paid out. Right. And if the market price is less than my promised price, then I'll pay that differential. Now, how it helps the managing the peaks is because now people would innovate to be most efficient at the peak time. How do they innovate? They innovate either through the better production generation mechanisms or through the storage mechanisms. So that's another way of handling this problem. So coming back to your topic of data availability is one point which can actually be fetched through smart metering, but more importantly, data access and interoperability. Whether data is available to various stakeholders who are decision makers through various sources easily, and whether they can use this data for decision making is also very, very important. I think report brings all these facts very well in terms of data availability, access, interoperability, and hence I think this is very good initiative in terms of structuring this aspect of demand flexibility through data and data management. So yeah, I think that's what I would like to say here. Yeah.
Thank you so much on your insights. And then now from a more policy perspective, I'd like to ask you, Shane. So electric vehicle uptake is growing really rapidly. If managed well, EVs could become one of the largest sources of demand flexibility. What policy and market signals do you think are needed today to ensure smart charging becomes the default rather than something we sort of add on and retrofit later?
Thanks, Donata. I'm just going to give a little bit of context around the Irish position at the moment. So in Ireland, EV sales are really strong at the minute, and we met our mid-decade target of EVs 4 months ahead of schedule last year. And so far in 2026, EV sales are actually 48% ahead of this time last year. And on the 1st of July, we released a new scrappage scheme that actually we fully committed within an hour. So the demand is there, which is fantastic. But the real exciting part of this is not the demand that's being there. It's the opportunity that EVs are going to bring to the energy sector. Like if you look at Ireland, we have already tariffs that are actually called EV specific tariffs. So that's when you can access really low rates of electricity from 2 to 6 a.m. And really has shown in Ireland that time of use tariffs like this can actually really change the behavior of EV owners. And we're seeing essentially the creation of a new peak overnight now between 2 and 6 a.m. And with more EVs coming on as the weeks go by, that can actually bring a further problem as well, you could say as well, to the grid. But last month in Ireland, dynamic tariffs were released for the first time as well, which could provide an answer, or looking at redesigning certain tariffs in Ireland that could track during the day to, say, periods of high renewable generation, or reacting to different price signals that could be set during the day. But to really support that, the chargers that are installed do have to be smart. And we were actually a little proactive in Ireland around that, 'cause in 2022, we released what we called our Smart Charger Register, where we set down the minimum criteria that a charger would have to meet for it to receive actually grant funding for it to be installed. And such things as being able to react to pricing signals, being able to schedule the charger and the times it was charging on were kind of the minimum. And we're actually now reviewing and updating that to look at what requirements are coming from the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation as well. But looking at more around the regulatory and the policy viewpoint, what I'd love to see in Ireland is aggregators coming into that space that can now aggregate all the domestic charge points that are out there and really activate that capacity within the flexibility side, services, products, and markets. But we currently don't have that in Ireland, so we need the regulator to essentially accelerate the development of the aggregation license in Ireland to try and really bring that to the fore and activate the capacity that is there, and potentially looking at certain different market changes, such as allowing the capacity to be traded into markets to come from multiple sources through the aggregation channels, rather than what it is at present, a single source. But again, as was mentioned earlier, underpinning all the regulatory and policy developments that are probably needed here is interoperability. Everything has to be able to integrate and work with each other. And like in Ireland, we really see EVs as that kind of gateway to awakening and activating consumers, particularly in the demand flexibility and the flexible energy space. And that they're the kind of policy instruments we would love to see, is that aggregation and interoperability in particular.
Thank you so much. So Amber, I'm gonna turn back to you. As flexibility markets develop, how do we ensure that consumers see genuine value actually, while still maintaining their trust and confidence? You've touched on this already a little bit. What role do you think should governments, retailers, and technology providers each play in making that participation for consumers simple but also equitable?
Yes, and I think we have already touched on this a little bit. I think what consumers value is simplicity, lower bills, and the comfort and convenience of the assets that they have purchased that can also be flexible assets to the system. And I think there are roles for governments, for energy retailers or aggregators, and for the technology developers as well, to make that reality come to pass. So I think the first thing is for governments, and when I say governments, I mean central ministries, but also regulators as well. There's a role for them to set the rules for the market and make sure that, firstly, that electrification is economic. So, and it makes economic sense for consumers. Part of the reason I'm sure that EV demand has been so strong in Ireland, just as it has been in the UK and other parts of Europe, is because the cost of fuel has gone up so much over the course of this year as a result of the war in Iran. And so actually electrification of transport has become much more economic. But there are structural things that governments can do to make that an easier decision for consumers, like ensuring that levies and taxes on electricity don't unfairly disadvantage the cost of electricity versus gas. And that will also help with heat electrification as well. But even beyond that, I think there's a role for governments in making sure that markets don't unfairly discriminate against distributed assets versus, and the flexibility that they can provide versus, large scale generation. And so there's things that governments can do, like making sure that capacity limits in certain markets don't unfairly disadvantage distributed resources, that response times don't unfairly disadvantage them, and also that metering requirements aren't such an unnecessary burden on those small scale assets. I think there's then a role for retailers and aggregators in translating that complexity across markets and all of those system signals into simple customer propositions. Because, there may be some customers who are really keen and want to keep on top of what's happening in energy markets, but most people probably just want to know for their EV, for example, that it's going to be charged when they want it and they're going to get cheap electricity when it's being charged. And that will happen reliably for them. So there's a role there for retailers to design tariffs, as Shane has already mentioned, for electric vehicles, for heat pumps, and also increasingly for multiple assets and optimizing those in a way that works for the system. And developing the kinds of algorithms that can do that optimization at different scales. So that is optimizing within customers' preferences, across a fleet of vehicles or across a portfolio of assets, and then optimizing across all of the different system signals, whether that be wholesale market signals or from ancillary services and capacity markets as well. And then for technology providers, I think Anil has mentioned this quite clearly, but I think there is a role there for ensuring interoperability between devices. And that is to ensure that consumers, no matter who they purchase their assets from, can access the many different offers that are available from different retailers and different aggregators. And so that is making sure that the devices themselves have standards that are interoperable, so that you can plug your car into a charger and it works everywhere. But then also, a software level, making sure that we have standardized APIs so that the retailers or aggregators can communicate with the assets and do that optimization successfully. So I think if governments, retailers and aggregators and technology providers each play the roles that I've outlined, then consumers will start to trust that the technologies that they adopt are interoperable with various different types of tariffs and levels of automation, and then we will really start seeing flexibility.
Thank you so much. So Anil, another question for you. Many countries are already investing heavily in grid reinforcements to deal with this rapidly growing electricity demand. How do you think can digitalization and demand flexibility help defer or optimize such investments? And have you seen really strong evidence of this in a particular place, maybe?
Sure. So as we discussed, one way of handling these peaks and democratizing energy among consumers is that you invest heavily on the capital expenditure on these grids and the lines, so that whenever peak is there, you are catering for that. But that's very, 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 I would say, imprudent way of handling these peaks. To a certain extent, yes, there have been massive investments. They are probably required also to strengthen or reinforce the grids, but there's a limit to which you can go on this. Even if you do on the main transmission line or high voltage lines, you can't do this in the distribution segment, because the distribution segment is so big, so large, and so, I would say, unplanned. You can't even access the information. How much congestion is there in which part, and whether congestion-based reinforcement would be enough. So one has to handle the congestion dynamically, then actually strengthening and reinforcing the grids only, because otherwise lots of cost of transportation of energy goes on to these investments. So currently, if you see, the prices of renewable power per unit are falling significantly across the globe. Rather, we know that currently they have already surpassed or reduced from the fossil fuel prices. In many countries and across globe, the investments are also higher on the renewable. Why? Because the cost of renewable at the generation end is far less than the cost of fossil fuel being done, and obviously the global climate impacts and the carbon footprint being not being considered here. So if the prices of generations are being handled, then your cost of transmission and cost of distribution can't be overweighing this benefit. If you keep reinforcing the grids at the transmission level as the distribution level, that too indiscriminately, you will end up with the higher price of landed price of this renewable, which will actually be the very counterproductive. So hence there's no way other than handling these peaks in very different manner. And yes, as we discussed, if we really know specific investments required based on congestion areas only, for that you need to know congestion areas, where is the congestion and where the investment required. For knowing the congestion, you again need the information. You need information on a real-time basis, and you need to have the network asset management in a manner which is very dynamic. There, these information and data becomes extremely critical. Actually, in India, I can give you the examples. Some of the states which were not very, I would say, progressive in past, and they were not best of the, I would say, the developed states, utilities have done extremely well by implementing this smart metering program. I would like to name two states like Assam, which is the northeast state of the country, and Bihar, which is the central part of the country, where losses were very high. Losses were to the tune of 30 to 50% of energy was being lost, dissipated because of the reasons the grids were not in shape and billing and collection was not being done properly. So they are the leaders of smart metering in this country. Actually, they are the poster boys of smart metering in India, Assam and Bihar. And I want to tell you that in year FY25, Assam as well as Bihar, who were very loss-making utilities, have turned to be profit-making utilities, because Assam has achieved about 80% of smart metering and Bihar has been around 60% of the smart metering. By reaching 60%, 80% of the smart metering figures, they are already profit-making utilities in the country, and they have shown the path, and they are the leaders in terms of how digitalization at grassroots level can actually make two changes. One, that you have the data, you have the far more strong decision making power, you know where to invest on the grid, where are the shortcomings. And second is, how do you handle the network asset management, how do you maintain the grids by knowing where the grids are tripping. Once you have the real time data, you know where the grids are weak, where the reinforcement is required, where the maintenance is required. Along with the capex, you have to have opex also in terms of maintenance. All this information you can receive if you really run this time of digitalization program very well. As I said, just having smart meters is not enough. You can install it, but if you don't access the insights out of it, if you don't have the data which is accessible, and decision makers don't have the data in the shape the way it should throw insights, it doesn't make sense actually. So we have not only implemented smart metering but also gone ahead with data analytics. Lots of data being thrown at the appropriate level, which is the working level, not only at the senior levels or administrative level, but also operational and line management level. We have to provide data so that this access can actually help them in day to day. So this would obviously help in not only reducing the capex, reducing the running expenses, but also ensuring that your collections are good and you are recovering your money without too much of investment. Once you are financially efficient, then you can invest more on the grids also. So that's a catch-22 situation. At one end, if you improve, you have better information, you have the better decision making, you have the optimized investments and manage grids well, and do better of financially as well as operationally. So that's the way forward.
Thank you so much. And I will keep the poster boys of smart metering with me as a very nice quote. Okay, so Shane, we've heard about Ireland already. You've also talked about what you're doing in Ireland today. And it is one of the report's case studies, highlighting both the growing importance of transport of EVs, but also electrified heating. In the future, what do you see as the biggest challenge for implementation? The infrastructure, regulation, consumer engagement or the coordination across sectors?
Yeah, I think I'd like to start with just saying that the existing energy systems, they've all been developed pretty much with a different time in mind. So to kind of expect them to be able to overnight switch into designing for a more flexible system isn't exactly fair on all the operators in that space, but it can be accelerated as well. And for me, I'm just going to single out two of the main barriers that I see. One is regulation. And a lot of people will always refer to regulatory barriers. For me, I look at it in a different aspect. I see regulation as an enabler to any changes that need to happen to that movement towards a more flexible system. But what I see as the barrier in this is the speed at which that can be done. So when you're creating, amending, updating, or implementing regulation, to be able to expedite the processes around that, so you can bring forward and reduce the timelines for implementation, is critical to the changes that are needed within this energy transition. So to truly deliver flexibility, we have to almost look at it as we need to take a little bit more risks at times. We need to be a bit more innovative in how we are designing and amending our regulations, but also to do it in a speedy manner. And the kind of second barrier I'd like to talk about is coordination. So historically, as I mentioned, like DSOs, TSOs, the appropriate thing at the time was that they designed for the needs of the grid, the needs of the network, which is 100% correct at the time. But what we're seeing now is more inclusive energy systems where the end users, the consumers, are becoming more and more to the fore and are actually becoming a central stakeholder and quite critical to what's actually happening. So it does need a more deeper, more collaborative coordination than has previously happened, where it's not simply the needs of the grid or the network that come into the decision-making process. It's actually the needs of the end users become critical, because we can design all the products, the initiatives, the services, but without designing it with consideration for the needs of the end user, participation rates could completely fall flat, which means all the great work that is done might not deliver the benefits and the need and the rewards for the grid and the people that is required. So co-designing towards the future with the needs of all interactors with the networks and the grids is imperative. It's not like it's one or the other. It's actually mutually beneficial to the end user, to the operators, to the suppliers, to everyone within that chain of stakeholders on the network. So to be really progressive, I feel we need to co-design, but co-design, we're looking at regulation as the enabler to really delivering progress towards flexibility.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think sort of what's been reoccurring in all your answers has really been this taking the view of the consumer, looking ahead. The role of coordination in all this is really crucial. So now I'd like to ask a question to you, Shane, but then I'd love our other two panelists to maybe react as well. So one theme that's running through the report is that flexibility really delivers value across the entire electricity systems, from consumers to network operators and generators. Where do you think governments and policymakers should focus first to accelerate deployment? Market reform, regulation, digital infrastructure, consumer incentives, or something else?
Yeah, it's difficult to pick just one, because in my opinion, they all need to progress simultaneously and they all are interlinked to each other to deliver success in the area. But if I was pushed to pick one, I'm going to come back again to the consumers. I think they are actually the critical step forward, is engaging, awakening and activating the consumers within this process. And if we design our work plans, our activities around what they're doing, we can drive their participation. And it's through their participation we actually gain the understanding for the next phase, the next steps we need to do. But it also allows us to essentially give them ownership of their own energy consumption as well. And it really empowers them to make the right decisions. And at the end of the day, the right decision for the consumers is still the right decision for the network operators at the same time. But building on that as well is that all decisions and all future actions, they have to be made with accessibility and equity in mind as well. It can't just be the people who can afford low carbon technology assets that can participate in flexibility, because all that will mean is that the people that can't afford it will end up paying more. And then we're actually increasing the disparity between energy poverty and those who can actually afford energy. So affordability, particularly with the way prices are volatile to say the least at the moment, is a critical part within this. So if we can look at driving regulation, market reform and policy towards having influence on energy affordability, energy poverty, but also going in the right direction so that we are driving electricity demand to the grid, but we're doing it in a flexible way, in a way that is mutually beneficial and that actually supports the just transition. So looking at the different consumers, looking at the needs of the grid and marrying them together as we kind of go on this journey hand in hand.
Thank you. Yeah, Amber, maybe also sort of on this, the role of the consumer, but also from an equity standpoint, also in terms of, you've already touched on this, but time constraints, other constraints, equity perspectives.
Yes, I definitely agree with Shane that consumers are vital to scaling demand flexibility, but I might take a slightly different choice in terms of the four enablers that you identify in your report as what needs to be prioritized in order for consumers to participate. And I would say of, end use technologies, digital infrastructure, market arrangements and regulation, and consumer participation, it's actually markets and regulation that need more on the implementation front, based on what I have seen from our research at Centre for Net Zero. I think we would say that at least in Europe and parts of the world where smart metering infrastructure already exists quite widely, and digitally connected distributed energy assets are being deployed at scale, consumers are willing to participate and be flexible if they're offered the right incentives. And so actually, I think flexibility at this point is fundamentally an incentives challenge. And how do we ensure that consumers are offered incentives? That's through market design and regulation. And so I think we need to think a lot more actively and do more to ensure that the system signals in wholesale markets or ancillary services can be responded to by distributed assets, but also that those system signals can be fed through to consumers. And I think there's a really great example. Anil was speaking about energy abundance, and the amount of energy that we now have thanks to the fast rollout of solar. And we're seeing that play out in markets where you're seeing negative wholesale prices, indicating that there's plentiful generation but not enough demand. And so that's a really good system signal, but it's often not fed through to consumers. So how can we redesign markets and regulations such that those system signals can be fed through to consumers to allow them to participate and respond by increasing their demand? To the point on equity, I think it was really striking, the chart that Brendan showed in the slides, showing how low-income groups or higher income groups can benefit from flexibility, or perhaps more the capacity that they might have to be flexible. And I think that's why focusing on equity for governments is really important. One of the things that I think has been a great success in the last couple of years from the government in the UK has been a focus on installing low carbon technologies, namely solar and batteries, in homes for low income customers and those who are in fuel poverty. Prior to this sort of policy change, government will have just given money to people who are considered in fuel poverty to help them with their energy bills. But by installing and helping to subsidize installing solar and batteries, those energy bills can be lowered in a very sustainable way. And you then have flexible assets in low-income households' homes that can then be used to help balance the system. So I think that has been a really great step forward for the government in the UK, and I think other governments can learn from that approach as well.
Thank you so much. Anil, will you pick one or will you say all of them?
Yeah, means it's all of them with some certain priority for the consumers. The commercial construct of the grids, if you just step out and see, is that generators would generate, transmission guys would transmit, and distribution would sell it to the consumers, and consumers would pay. This is the commercial construct, that consumers would pay to the distribution system operators, they'll pay to transmission system operators, they'll pay to generators also. So who is paying is the consumer. This is the commercial construct historically. Is that the right construct is a big question to be solved today. With consumers being able to be prosumers, as we say in India, that you can produce also, right? And they need not be paying high prices during the peaks, because peak is not caused by consumers only. So this is the new construct which requires to come in, that consumers are not the only paying community. They may be gainers also out of the grid, whether they can gain by producing through solar, through producing through their DERs, whether they can gain by transaction between point to point, as we call P2P transactions, where they can sell extra energy produced through solar rooftop to small industry, whether there could be time of day tariff where they can pay less during certain times. So these are the decisions which actually empower the consumers in control as well as gaining out of the grid. For this, lots of market dynamism in terms of structuring and regulations required. If we do this portion well, not only the demand flexibility would be handled very well, we would be democratizing grid far better, and we would be giving share of opinion making and decision making in the hands of the consumers. So I would think consumers are the real segment where the market regulation and policy should work more.
Thank you very much. I think, the answer is maybe slightly different for all three of you, but it all centers around the viewpoint of the consumer. So that is nice to hear. Okay, so to close, since we have almost run out of time, I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to ask each of you to be very brief, 1 minute answer. I'm going to put you on the spot. If there's one recommendation in today's report that governments should prioritize in your opinion when they leave this webinar today, what would it be and why? And let's start with Amber.
I would say that governments and regulators, market operators should align the incentives that consumers face with the value that they create for the electricity system. The technologies already exist, they're being deployed, and consumers can respond if the right incentives are in place. So I think the number one challenge that people should take away from this is to make flexibility scale, is to make sure that the rules of the system reward consumers for operating in a flexible way.
Thank you so much. Shane.
Yeah, I would say faster decision making around market reforms that enable flexibility and updating regulations, but also bringing forward interoperability and automation for the end users. They don't want to be manually intervening every half hour or every day or whatever it may be.
Thank you. Anil.
Yeah, so I think synergizing with everybody, digitalization at grassroots level is the way forward. And mere digitalization is not enough. Whatever digital public infrastructure we are raising, we are investing more and more money. We should look at using the data for decision making. Data for decision making requires interoperability as well as access of the data. So I think platforms where data can be accessed very well, can be used for decision making, and can actually contribute to demand flexibility and price reduction and tariff reduction should be our ultimate goal.
Thank you so much. Also for this really fascinating discussions, for your points of view on this, for shedding light on implementation and how we get there. What I'm taking from this really is, as we've touched on before, the keeping in mind the point of view of the consumer and the importance of interoperability. So thank you very much, and I'm going to hand back to Brandon.
Thank you very much, Donata, and thank you, Shane, Anil, and Amber, for a really, really enthralling conversation. I think you covered so many different aspects there. As Donata is pointing out, it's about the importance of the market design, the role of potential dynamic tariffs, how to optimize the renewable integration, both those large scale but behind the meter renewables as well, to make sure that customers are rewarded, and how to value them through the power of aggregation, bringing those together with a large amount of flexibility potential, to make sure that the power system is operating efficiently and cost effectively, so that we can be supporting electrification to make sure that the prices are coming down to support those new loads, make electric heating much more cost efficient compared to fossil fuel through gas and oil boilers, but also to make EVs much more affordable to unlock their huge efficiency potential. Because I think behind a lot of these conversations is that a big efficiency story, when we're looking at the role of EVs, heat pumps, and other electric technologies, which are far more efficient and provide much more benefits when we're particularly looking at trying to achieve those climate ambitions and the national priorities. And the one phrase I'm going to be taking away from the conversation today is how to design all of these markets is through co-designing. I think it's really interesting. It's working together. It's more collaborative. There's a lot of competing forces, but if we can get all of those people in the same room working together, pushing in the same direction, I think we can see a lot of change from policy, markets, and customer rewards. But a lot of the conversation that we've had today is through the lens of advanced economies and advanced digital deployment. And that's not being reflected equally across the world right now. In many emerging markets and developing economies, those access to technology is not as equal and fairly distributed. So as part of the TRIDEN initiative, we have the IEA here in Paris, who is doing the analysis and is researching how these technology advancements are going to be changing in the coming years, how it can be integrated to support greater power system modernization through the lens of digitalization primarily, but also how we unlock efficiency across the whole power system that everyone can benefit. But on the other side, across the way, not too far from the office here, is colleagues in the United Nations Environment Programme, who are also working on the TRIDEN initiative, who are implementing projects to test the digital technologies that we have in advanced economies, to test them on the ground in real world conditions, to see how those benefits can be shared, to have power systems modernized in many other areas. And through the first phase of the TRIDEN project, we've already seen pilot projects deployed in India, Colombia, Brazil, and Morocco. And now we're moving forward to the second phase of those pilot projects. So now I'm going to hand over the floor to my colleague Art Sarf from the United Nations Environment Programme, who's going to give us an update on those phase 2 pilot projects. Please, Art, the floor is yours.
Super. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Brian, Brendan, Jerome, Director General Gary, colleagues. I hope you can see my PPT. I'm sharing the screen.
We can do, yes.
Super. So it's really a pleasure to close out this session with a brief update on TRIDEN Phase 2. Before I get started, let me echo once again the thanks already given by IEA colleagues to Italian Ministry of Environment and Energy Security for their support to TRIDEN. MASE's leadership, alongside the strategic partnership with IEA, as well as UNEP's role on the implementing side with the pilots, is really what makes this initiative possible. And everything that I'm really about to share is a direct result of this support. So Brendan, of course, you explained it, but one line of quick context for anybody new to the pilot project side of things at 3DEN. We fund real-world pilots that put these digital technologies into practice across Africa, across Latin America. So we get really on-the-ground evidence, not just theory, on what can work on the ground. So let me start with the selection process of the projects that we support, because really the rigor of the selection is what gives us the confidence in the results that follow. So we ran a call for proposal earlier last year and received 93 proposals. After doing a prerequisite screening, 44 were eligible and moved into a full assessment. Yeah, we scored them against, three main criteria: their impact, scalability, their feasibility. From there, we passed on 15 of these 44 through a due diligence process, of course, the highest ranked ones, assessing them one by one, including on-site missions. And this process really narrowed the field down to the 14 projects that we're supporting now. We awarded the grant. Announcement was made back at COP in Belém last year. And since then, we've been moving through the contracting process. Happy to share that, all 15 grant agreements, all 14 are now signed, and implementation is well underway. So what does this look like in numbers? So across the 14 projects, we've mobilized just over $20 million in grant funding, at an average of about 1.43 million requested per project, against a total project size of around 2.08 million, meaning that for every dollar of 3DEN funding, we're bringing in that additional co-financing, about $8 million of additional investment that's been mobilized. Our portfolio is relatively evenly split. We were funding in phase 2 projects in 2 thematic areas: agro-food and urban energy systems. And as you can see, projects are being implemented in 7 countries. The focus of phase 2 was really on African continent this time around. So we have projects in Kenya, Tunisia, Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and we of course included Brazil as well from phase 1. So these projects are led by consortia based in 10 countries across Europe, Africa, the Americas, involving more than 80 different companies and institutions. So of course here you can see the full phase 2 portfolio, 14 projects dealing with dairy digitalization in Kenya and Tunisia, smart irrigation in Ethiopia and Tanzania, 2 grid modernization in Nigeria and Brazil, as well as urban e-cooking in Kenya and Tanzania. So I'm not going to go through all 14, but very happy to share the slides with everybody afterwards. Really a quite diverse set of innovative solutions tackling both sides of the energy transition: how we produce and use energy in agriculture, and then how we manage it in cities. So maybe to give you a couple of examples oriented towards the report released today. So this one, again, for phase 2, is the Dresber project in Brazil. This is led by Enel Grids, working with Sao Paulo's utility company and both Brazilian and Italian research partners. The idea is to use AI-based vegetation risk detection and predictive grid analytics to make Sao Paulo's grid really more efficient and resilient to extreme weather. So the project is targeting over 1.2 million users who would benefit from increased reliability, more than 1,000 fewer power interruptions, and 678 tons of CO2 equivalent avoided per year, thanks to the reduced diesel backup generation. So this is the second project I wanted to share with you today. This is led by ICU, or Instituto per la Cooperación Universitaria, working with the Sapienza University of Rome. And the idea here is to retrofit municipal infrastructure with smart LED lighting in the city of Naboul in Tunisia. And the aim is to deliver 1,200 megawatt hour a year in energy savings, as well as, of course, the CO2 reductions that you can see that go with it. And of course, a 50% cut in street lighting peak load. Coming to the third example, we have the Verde project, which is led by Smart City Instruments. This is a spin-off of the University of Calabria, combining AI predictive modules, Internet of Things, as well as a virtual power plant control to really strengthen local energy resilience, saving 95,000 kilowatt hour of energy, 48 tons of CO2 equivalent a year. And the final example to share with you this morning is the grid digitalization and visualization pilot in Nasarawa State in Nigeria. This one is led by the Rocky Mountain Institute, working with the Abuja Electricity Distribution Company. And they're aiming to modernize a 100-kilometer feeder that is serving Nigeria's Toto community, deploying smart metering and grid analytics. So this project would impact 1,200 businesses, 33,000 households, 2 to 3 more hours of power a day, and as well, of course, the CO2 gains that come with it. And this is really a model we think can really be scaled up across sub-Saharan Africa. So these 4 examples really are just a snapshot of what's happening across all 14 pilots in phase 2. As I said, we're just beginning implementation of phase 2 now, and we hope to be back very soon as the results start coming in. I want to close by once again thanking the Italian Ministry of Environment and Energy Security that has really made all of this work possible, to IEA colleagues for this strategic collaboration. We're really excited about the future of the initiative, including the finance facility that Director General Gary mentioned at the start of his intervention. We're looking forward to continuing this fruitful, innovative partnership for us at UNEP. Honestly, this is really an example of the kind of win-win development partnership that's going to be really crucial, particularly in these challenging geopolitical times in the years to come. So thank you, and back to you, Brandon.
Thank you very much, Art. Thank you for the updates. It's really exciting to see these finally starting to mobilize. We've seen the development of so far, and seen all the very hard work from the colleagues over UNEP from getting them to the delivery stage, which is not an easy task. So again, thanks to the colleagues at UNEP, and thank you very much again to the colleagues that have joined us for the discussion, from Anil Rao, Shane Prendergast, and Amber Woodward. And also, again, thank you to the colleagues from joining us at the start from the Italian Ministry of Environment and Energy Security. And thank you very much to the colleagues as well, which have joined us today for this webinar. We'll be sharing the slides and uploading the video as well afterwards to the landing page, so you can watch that anytime you feel like it in the future. And so all to stay. Thank you very much, and I'll close the session here. Take care. Bye-bye.